Hello, my friends. Have you ever gotten extremely frustrated or exacerbated with a video game before? I'm willing to bet that the obvious answer is yes, but I'm also going to guess that chances are your frustration resulted from either unresponsive mechanics or an inconvenient design choice that made getting from point A to point B or getting that thing that you want more frustrating. But recently I had a different kind of experience with this kind of exacerbation while playing Pillars of Eternity. Now, I wanted to get to Pillars of Eternity before Pillars of Eternity 2 came out, and I'm afraid I am definitely far past the deadline for that because I am not going to be finishing this game anytime soon. But my reason for being exacerbated with this game is not because of any mechanical frustration, though if I had to point to one, I would definitely just say that the many loading screens and a few UI choices that probably don't pose any problem whatsoever on PC do slow down my enjoyment and took some time getting used to. No, instead I want to talk about how I felt upon entering the second act of the game, the City of Defiance Bay. But before I get into it, know that rather than just being upset, I took this as an opportunity to experience something novel. So let's talk about Pillars of Eternity. The first thing that I really formed an appreciation for was the character of Durance, a character described as a remarkably ugly man who rants and raves at you at all times about how horrible and hypocritical the god that he worships is. And at first I thought this was just some humorous juxtaposition of the priest character archetype being someone normally devoted to their god and getting their magical powers from their god in fantasy RPGs, and replacing that archetype with someone who actively reviles the god that they worship and yet still follows them and their teachings. Part of progressing through Durance's storyline requires that you actually take the time to talk to him about various topics in his dialogue trees to get to know him. And in doing so, I came to see Durance in a different light. And at this point, the character really reminds me of an archetype more inspired by Diogenes. He may be mad and doggish, but everything he says is consistent with itself, and even if you don't agree, it does pose interesting challenges to your view by being so remarkably consistent. Durance as a character is one that sees himself being betrayed by his god and being challenged by his god because challenge and trial are the only things that his god demands. And rather than rejecting that, rather than seeing it as a slight or a reason to stop believing in the god, he took it to be the very reason for his faith itself, and actively chastises any other people who claimed to worship that god, but was unwilling to accept the trial and the challenge that was put forth, despite it being the central tenet and the only real tenet of the faith. Just as Diogenes urged us to embrace all emotion and natural experience and revel in it, even the negative, painful, and disgusting emotions, Durance too encourages us to face trial by fire head on and embrace it as trial, not expecting reward or outcome of any kind. The experience of actually getting to travel and fight alongside Diogenes, one of the most famous figures in the history of philosophy, has been extremely enjoyable to me, and I just wanted to give props to the game for providing this experience before I switch over to the experience that is frustrating, but in its frustration also offers something that I haven't experienced in a game before. When entering Defiance Bay, the first thing that occurs is you are greeted by a large mob of rabble-rousers who are crying about justice and denouncing the evils of animancy. Animancy in this world is basically half soul magic, but also extensively representative of psychology, and the mixture of ancient Greek concepts of the psyche being equivalent with soul, as well as the unethical practices that went into learning in early psychology and early psychological sciences and experimentation, makes for its own philosophically interesting point. But what really stood out to me is that the spokesperson for this group, called the Dozens, didn't appear to be a mad person, didn't appear to be closed-minded or resentful when you are approached by him at the gate. In fact, he literally says to go and visit their headquarters and encourages you with the tagline, "There are a lot of open-minded people there." And as you go through side quests in the city, it becomes very apparent that they are anything but open-minded. They have a very specific closed-minded agenda that they are pursuing. And yet the rhetoric of open-mindedness and the reputation of the city as being a place of deep dialogue and discord amongst the citizenry gives the initial impression of them being very fair and very understandable. This group called the Dozens is also juxtaposed against another political group called the Crucible Knights. And this group is significantly different, being very upfront about having this code of honor and a very clear political goal of seeking legitimacy as a knighthood. They don't make any attempt whatsoever to appear open-minded, and yet are far more open to practices like animancy and different studies in order to pursue their ends. The group that is expressed to be the more closed-minded group appears to be more open-minded to further study of new ideas and new realms of science in the context of this universe. However, when you visit them for the first time, the very first conversation you have is with a Crucible Knight who embodies the sentiment of racism against one of the fantasy races in this world called Orlans, which are basically small elf-like creatures. Think like Dobby from the Harry Potter series, only a bit hardier. However, this person too is not simply a ball of hatred, but presents himself as being an extremely reasonable person. And the extremely reasonable thing that he is asking is for all people of that race to just be monitored, perhaps by the kind of militant organization to which he belongs. When you question him on this, whether you gently suggest that he may be overstepping his bounds, or harshly say that he is absolutely infringing upon the rights of these people, or even if you just suggest that maybe if you don't scrutinize them as much, they won't have to feel as scrutinized, his response is a very simple and clear, "Hey, I'm just telling the truth is all." And the problem with this statement, especially as a response to what you say, is that it has absolutely nothing to do with the truth. He didn't make a claim on the state of things. He just said what he wanted to do, which was an obviously racist idea that infringed upon rights. But he talked about a non-factual suggestion as though it being the truth made it okay. Ultimately, all of the quests in Defiance Bay can in some way be brought down to a dynamic like this. One thing is being said, another thing is being left out, and a very convincing thing is being said about the suggestion, even though it's basically unrelated to the suggestion as a whole. And herein lies the big frustration, and the novel lesson that the game is teaching by putting you through it. You may not realize it if you're not looking for it while playing this game, but Defiance Bay as a whole is attempting to demonstrate to the player the difference between honest intellectual pursuit and inquiry, and the separate practice of persuasion and rhetoric. Now, it's unfortunate that the truth and logical form are not themselves the things which are most persuasive to people, and that rhetoric and persuasion appeals to emotion, positions of authority, or positions of popularity. It is absolutely true that the studies of rhetoric and persuasion are their own unique field, their own unique form of conversation. There are so many ways to be persuasive without actually needing to rely on rationality. And this distance between persuasion and logic is one of the biggest fears that philosophy has been dealing with since its inception in ancient Greece. Many of the ancients wrote books on rhetoric, criticizing the sophists and other prominent politicians for their focus on rhetoric, as opposed to being focused on virtue and actually providing information and proper teaching to the citizenry, but at the same time cataloged the methods, the styles, and the strategies that rhetoric employs in order to be convincing. And many philosophers ended up holding the position, Plato included, that rhetoric is an empty and base practice on its own. In order to compete, in order for philosophy to stand a chance against things that are irrational and yet convincing, the philosopher must be able to employ rhetoric just as tactfully as anyone else. The reason why Defiance Bay is frustrating to me is not because there's something wrong with how this part of the game was designed, but because it was designed so well to make you feel the distance between rhetoric and logic, to make you feel the distance between dialogue and debate. And to a certain extent that pains me, because I used to do debate, and that won't come as a surprise to anyone. I committed myself very fully to the practice of persuasive argument when in high school, and was the first person in my high school in more than a decade to go to the National Congressional Debate Tournament, though admittedly I didn't get very far. But I didn't continue with debate simply because learning debate helped me to realize my passion for philosophy. And eventually I came to find that debate was empty. You can try to win an argument, but the only thing that results from winning is that you don't learn anything new. You just go on with whatever you argued for. You don't gain anything by winning. It's only by losing a certain portion of your argument and then working with your interlocutors to develop the ideas and create something new can you as an individual actually gain, actually progress in the ideas you want to express. So it all comes down to a fail faster mentality. If you focus on debate, if you focus on rhetoric, and you focus on winning, you may progress socially in a very surface level, perhaps financial, perhaps popular sense of the word, but you won't progress personally. You'll stagnate. And this helped me to realize that the ideal scenario for a philosopher is not to be right about any of your ideas, but to find the person who can prove you wrong, so that you can make something new together with love and goodwill. That's why the first word in philosophy is love. The second word is wisdom. It is a loving practice that pursues wisdom. Debate and rhetoric can only be hostile, and that hostility is extremely frustrating. And I think Pillars of Eternity does a marvelous job making the player understand this in an intuitive way. Thank you for watching, my friends. This video comes as an impromptu recording that I didn't even prepare in advance or write anything for, because I didn't want to forget to get these thoughts down as I put a pause to playing Pillars of Eternity so I can jump on to playing the new God of War. I'm extremely excited for this game. It looks amazing. I've heard only good things, seen only good things about the combat. Is just giving me a special kind of hype that I rarely get. But if you enjoyed this video, please remember to subscribe and ring the notification bell. I don't pay anyone to advertise, and we are still a small community, so the only way that we can grow is with your help. Please comment below and let me know your own ideas about playing Pillars of Eternity, or what you're excited for or enjoying in God of War. Because by the time you see this, I definitely will have gotten a few hours deep, so don't worry about spoiling anything. I hope you will be able to join us next week. And remember, stay true.